My name is Yandamade, and I am an urban designer, lecturer, and researcher, and got really involved with the Now Now project through again a series of fortunate events. And I think it all really started with this publication. Really, I think the panel that I'm going to be speaking to today, that we're all going to be speaking to today, and just engaging with, have really been part of this journey. I think leading up to where we are in one way or another. So I think it's great to get around and have this conversation. I think as a group of colleagues and friends and like-minded individuals who've again been engaging these sort of topics and work through different lenses. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to keep it quite relaxed. I'm happy that everyone's here on a public holiday, right? To cover means that we're doing something right, and we want to keep it as something that again looks forward at possibilities, what could be, and what we're dealing with, and yeah, the reimaginings of that. So I think this is a perfect platform and a perfect day for something like this, so that we cannot just hark on the issues, but start seeing what, again, like I said, could be. So really, really, thank you for everyone for coming through. We'll give you back the rest of your public holiday because I know some of us are going back to work tomorrow. So we'll just make sure we have a little bit of fun and then yeah, release you back into the wild. All right, cool. Cool. So I'm just gonna just go through some formalities really to introduce our panelists. And like I said, some of us are we've been around, we've seen each other, we've chatted, we've really been yeah, more than just colleagues, but really grown close. So I'm just gonna start with Jens over here. Jens is a researcher at NU, holds a master's degree in urban planning. So I'm really gonna read the bio. So it's gonna be quite dry. I'm sure most of them actually would prefer something a little looser, but I'm just gonna go through. So just bear with us. All right, cool. All right, so yeah, master's in urban planning and has worked in the planning, human settlements policy, and design fields. He's passionate about bottom-up processes of community engagement, so that planning and urban governance not only empowers and learns from citizens, but responds to their agency in demanding and asserting their rights to the city. Then we've got Robin. We go way back, previous researcher at Ndifunugwazi. After years of hard work to bring positive and evidence-based change to the housing crisis, Robin formed part of the original panel to discuss the public land for people, not for parking campaign. And then we've got Chate. She's a keen urbanist, and we've worked together a couple of times. She has completed her master's degree in city planning with a dissertation titled Beyond a Roof: Streetscapes, Multidimensional Approach to Resolving Housing Challenges in Cape Town CBD. She seeks to dedicate her career to creating better, more inclusive and livable cities for all, and was integral in creating the initial publication, as was mentioned, upon which the competition has been based: public land for people, not for parking. And then last but not least, we've got Thomas, is an architect and urbanist with over 15 years of experience working across sub-Saharan Africa. As founder of Local Studio, he led projects ranging from educational facilities and civic spaces to new urban precincts and more than 2,500 homes. The practice became known for combining design innovation with measurable impact, often working in underserved contexts in a close partnership with communities, clients, and collaborators. In 2015, he co-founded Trollope Chapman Architecture, a new practice focused on landmark projects defined by material innovation, measurable impact, and inspired placemaking. Alongside practice, he teaches architecture at the University of Cape Town and is completing a doctorate at ETH Zurich on the history of civic centers in South Africa. Cool. Bit of a mouthful. Thank you. Great. So now that we've got the formalities out of the way, I'm hoping we can just yeah, have a little comfortable conversation. So I'm going to give everyone a little bit of a format structure that we're going to be going through with this panel discussion, just to get you guys involved as well in the conversation. Because I think it's super important that we hear all of our voices in here. Like I said, where most of us are old friends and colleagues who we've spoken to each other multiple times. It'd be great to have you guys in the conversation. Cool. So the format will be, we'll be breaking it up into two parts. So it'll be Q1 and Q2, which is basically two themes, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Just so we don't have the backlog of questions. You've all been here before, right? Where we hold your question until the end of the end of the session, and then we just don't get to you. All right, it gets a bit awkward, you're a little frustrated, you've been passionate about a topic that you've been wanting to get out, and you don't get the opportunity. Cool. So first two themes, we're gonna have a little Q&A, allow the audience just to participate in the chat, and then we're gonna go into Q2 and Q3, and then from there again close it off with another Q&A. Awesome. Fantastic. Okay. Let's have some fun. Awesome. Okay. So theme one, just for something you guys feel, everyone as a prompt for the audience. So we're going to be looking at starting from the proposals, All right. And I want to give everyone a prompt. So it's just about looking at the competition proposals and the ideas emerging from them for what you've seen today. What patterns or shifts stand out in how designers are approaching affordable housing in Cape Town today? And any ideas that generally felt new or promising from what you've experienced and seen here today? So I think it's important, again, like I said, we keep looking forward to what could be. So if there's anything, start thinking about these things as I start engaging with the panelists. And when you open up to the Q&A as well, it'll be fantastic to hear your perspectives, and you can direct any of the questions to the panelists. Sound great? Awesome. All right. First and foremost, Jens. Cool. So Jens, you've been intimately involved with the competition as one of the judges, right? Which has been again an interesting process, considering your background and your experience in practice. So, as a recent judge in the competition entry, if we look at the recent climate of where we're at in terms of again the auctioning that has happened recently as well with 50 public sites, would you say this competition has changed your perspective on what type of problem affordable housing is in any way whatsoever, or has it more than anything been sort of giving you more of what we've seen? So has it changed your perspective in terms of from practice in the way you've been engaging to what you've been able to see in the adjudication process of the projects?
Thanks. That's a good question.
Yeah.
A hard one to start off, but yeah, I think the main thing that stood out in the competition entries was kind of a attempt. I mean, it was asked in the brief, and I think a lot of the entries were very successful in creating kind of a sense of community spaces, because a lot of architecture, a lot of housing developments, and especially a lot of social housing developments, or if they are kind of a mixed income development, are often due to kind of policy reasons and feasibility reasons, are often kind of split between as a social housing element of the development and kind of a market rate portion, and that means ultimately integration and kind of and kind of engagement amongst people of different incomes and backgrounds is kind of hindered, and a lot of the entries actually extremely successfully kind of in the communal spaces and in the in-between spaces, entering through the buildings and how you would circulate around the space, and creating kind of all these different levels of communal spaces. And I think that was a nice and refreshing thing to actually see, because out there in the actual kind of affordable housing market, it's not really done in that way or very successfully. And it was interesting also kind of in terms of the attempts to incorporate kind of a different scale, and being a bit more creative about kind of how inspiring the space is, because a lot of housing, affordable housing, unfortunately has to be kind of, or it's viewed by architects as like a cost-cutting exercise. And the first thing that gets cut is kind of any kind of attempt to create a comfortable space or kind of an interesting space. And all of the entries obviously have varied according to kind of how sort of experimental or out there they were. A lot of them kind of had a very good balance between kind of like viability and also kind of an attempt to make a really interesting piece of architecture, and a kind of a comfortable space to be in.
And I just want to again open it up to everyone in that regard as well. In terms of again why again affordable housing and these housing models become again a cost-cutting exercise, something that we tried to really broaden in this brief as well, because we were part of the team that put it together, was really to zoom out, right? To really start to not focus on the object, the architecture itself, to allow more voices into the space, so that you start again reinterpreting the competition less as a project around just housing, but to again like to zoom out and look at it at an urban scale. So I wanted to just to open it up to the panel to say as well, like in terms of how we approach affordable housing, how you've seen social housing, Thomas, for example, in your work. has it been much of the same in a sense that it is through the mechanisms that allow it to happen in Johannesburg specifically, and then looking at it in Cape Town, are we failing in terms of looking at it more from a certain scale, or are we failing because we don't have the mechanisms or the policies that allow it to again be approached in the manner that we're starting to see in some of the entries that we've got in here?
Thanks, Sayanda. Look, I actually haven't had enough time to look at the entries, so I'm not gonna talk specifically about them. But what I can say is I'm a bit of a voice from maybe both the past and the future in Johannesburg, which is I come from I practiced at a time there where there was a bit of a Kool-Aid in the water, or Kool-Aid belief that that actually, and it was a good thing, that affordable housing could be something that is also profitable, and so it was just a very interesting time, and I don't know why that is. So I think we've got to ask ourselves what inspires these kind of revolutions of home building or house building. And in Joburg's case, I think it was the 2010 World Cup. That meant a lot of investment in infrastructure, particularly the BRT, this program called Corridors of Freedom. All of those things I think helped, but in the end, what it created was an energy and an excitement in the market, which ultimately made what we could maybe call and I think if there's developers in the audience, they might tell me I'm talking nonsense, but from my perspective, a affordable housing bubble where and so there was a lot of building happening, lots and lots and lots, and we worked. I ran a studio at the GSA, and we made this. The whole topic of the studio was this thing called the elusive 11%, because we were working with developers who would only build if they could see an 11% return, and somehow that they were believing it. So a lot of affordable housing got built, and it was this excitement, and maybe a lot of people coming into Johannesburg, and then all of a sudden this thing burst, and there's 11% returns went down to probably on average probably 3%, and so the very reasons that people were building affordable housing then were not there anymore. But then there was this housing, and so we have this moment. So I can say it happened by accident, but in Johannesburg there's this scenario where this is where my main experience, where there's actually a lot of stock now, a lot of rental stock available. I would say 10 times more than what we see here, if I'm speaking anecdotally. And I guess we can reverse engineer and see what were the reasons. How did we get there? And so, I mean, in short, there's absolutely a play on infrastructure. City of Joburg investing in these kind of routes, and they never really did land. That was an interesting thing. It was always infrastructure, and then fast tracking rezonings, things like that, and then they had a particular, and it's all dead now. I mean, unfortunately, but this urban design department, which worked with developers to try get nice mixed-use typologies going. It was all these ingredients that produced this kind of this alchemy for a lot. But I think what's very interesting to note, and then I'm going to hand it over to somebody else, was all of that was not proven. So it was maybe these guys made profit maybe for a year or two. And now they're just sitting with the stock. They can't sell it, but it's now it amounts to what effectively it's not really entry level affordable, but it's affordable. So what do I mean by that? 2-bedroom apartment for a family, 7,000 rand a month in a very good location. I would happily live in that apartment. Imagine that here, like anywhere here. So it's quite a remarkable, and I think the rule, and I think we've got to find many ways to get there, but is build more housing, just build housing, and I'm going to say maybe what somebody thinks is a swear word here today is I'm going to bring up the apartments being built in Sea Point by Robert Silk. Where, and I think there's apartheid between the kind of market developers and us who are not in that space is not healthy, because I had him talk at UCT about a year ago, and he's quite an interesting character, where he said he said, I don't care that I'm only working for luxury, because in my opinion, as long as we're consistently building housing, at some point there might be a revolution, and then those very apartments that are so beautiful that I'm doing might become affordable. And it sounds crazy for Cape Town, but I come from Johannesburg. My own apartment that I lived in was once part of what was considered the richest square mile in the world at the time, Killarney, where there was the film industry of South Africa. And it was very, very well. I mean, there's our lobby is clad in copper, and it's like this amazing space, completely affordable now. So how does that happen? And I think it's this thing about markets. And so yeah, I'm hardly an expert, but just from somebody who's been involved in this kind of bubble where developers thought affordable housing could be profitable. The main takeaway is we've got to find whatever way we can, alchemy, to just build more housing, consistently build more housing, and then I think you're in a good position to start post-rash or rethinking it. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that is helpful. Yeah.
I want to just contrast that, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry.
I want to contrast that with the work that's been done in Cape Town, like specifically, because Thomas, you spoke about the fact that it was driven up by infrastructure in Joburg. And one of the mechanisms that we've sort of worked with here in Cape Town, specifically the publication that we're talking about, was really focusing on the land, right? And what I want to ask you, Tjate and Robin, as well, is that is it still a feasibility problem? Because I feel like we've really been able to push that argument. And I think in a lot of the work that NU has done, we really push the argument of like, is this feasible? Are we able to provide this many units? Is this viable in this area? And I think we've pushed that agenda quite well. And I think that argument has been made quite solidly. So do you still think, are we still in a feasibility argument? Or are we beyond feasibility from your work that you've done on this publication and what you're seeing going forward? Where do you think we're at in terms of, again, contrasting that with Johannesburg and where it was in its moment with the infrastructure versus the approach that we've taken? Are we still in that feasibility stage, or do you think we're beyond feasibility at this point as an argument?
It's a great question, because I think the answer is maybe different for different people. From our perspective, it's always been feasible and possible. So in a way, there are these, one of your questions is about how do we get these ideas to reality? What are these kind of structural political barriers that get in the way? And one of those, the first and sometimes biggest barrier for us in Cape Town, is this kind of collective imagination that the city can actually be something different. And not just in terms of, neighborhoods that are race and class diverse, disrupting areas like Sea Point with affordable housing, not just in that way, but also in terms of radically and inclusively densifying well-located areas, moving away from the single car dependence, ownership, these types of things. We really lack this imagination for things to be different. And I think that's something that the proposals are so helpful with. So we have these, with the initial one that we did, which was just the start, and now with these beautiful proposals, we've kind of proven that it's feasible, and we're provoking the public imagination that this land, which is sitting empty for most of the day, sometimes being used for cars, mainly for government employees, could be something different. And these things are kind of tied together. Whether it's feasible, it's also like, can we imagine what's possible here? So I think something really interesting to reflect on is the Tafelberg case, because this campaign actually comes directly from the original work done on Tafelberg. One of the sites, Government Garage 2, was one of the original pieces of public land that the provincial government intended to sell off with the Tafelberg site for a quick profit hit, and then because of the work on Tafelberg, ended up holding on to. And something in the Tafelberg example is that over years, there have been 9 rounds of feasibility proposals done, one by NU, some by this type of competition, but also from inside the national government, from inside of NASHO, from social housing experts. And And I guess there's a question there of how many times do you have to prove that something is feasible, which means that we're hitting up against something different, which must be this question of imagination, willingness, political will. And I think what's really important there is that, something that I have really, really learned from the land and housing movements that Mfumukwazi works with is this insistent imagination, not as like a fluffy thing, as a real like skill to keep building and training in yourself. So it makes me even think of the student protest 2015, 2016, with this call for insourcing of workers, months and months of university management saying it's not possible, no, it's not possible, the numbers don't work, it can never happen. The students continued to protest and pressure, and at some point it just becomes possible. And I have so many examples of this from the actual land and housing movement. Some of the leaders are in this room with us today, where the persistent imagination from activists has proven that something that was said to be impossible becomes possible. So I guess in short, I think the feasibility is proven, and now we're in the stage of making it possible.
Lovely answer. I think for me, it's political willness. I think that there's a lack of imagination into what policy looks like in South Africa, that we're not thinking of it more productively. Inclusionary housing is possible. It's possible in Stellenbosch. It can be possible in Cape Town. I think that there's something blocking us to actually imagining a better world for South Africans. I think it's a really tricky one. Is this mic on? Oh, that's a bit loud. I was just saying that I think there's a lack of imagination in the city, and I think that we really need to start looking at inclusionary housing more possibly and actually make one in Cape Town. There's one in Stellenbosch, there's just not one in Cape Town. I think that shows that maybe it's the people who are benefiting from it, and maybe that's something that we need to look into more deeply. Yeah, that was a really good answer. I have nothing more to say.
Can I talk about parking quickly? Yeah. Sorry, just a quick note, just on the parking thing. I think it's a little story. It was and maybe we've got to look for example how to get this to ground. Is look for examples where maybe this has happened elsewhere in this country, not via the government, because I think it's just very complicated that way. But we were involved with a property fund, a listed property fund called Dipula, and they found themselves with a lot of well-located properties, commercial properties that they couldn't actually, and this is all in Gauteng, that they couldn't lease because they were no longer feasible as A or B grade office space. And so they had I was in the room when they were working out their feasibility, just on the topic of feasibility, and land, and can putting land in at zero make a scheme more feasible? And it was, and it did work in some cases. They only hit there, and they've got these finance committees who decide, and I think the city is very similar, and who decide when a project can actually get a green light. And it is around the 11% yield or whatever. It's very, very hard to get. And the only way they could get there is if they put land in at zero. So they had these assets that were on the books. And they said, no, the only way we can build housing, and it was this magical, like again, this alchemy where they were well located for housing, badly located for offices. We put it in at zero, like as if city would give you this land, and then the feasibility worked. So it was a very interesting case. But the big thing to keep in mind is all adaptive reuse. So your costs of construction are much less. And I think on a greenfield, I think it's not to be a kind of bad news bear, but I think the minute it becomes greenfield, it's a bit, the obstacles are much higher to actually on the books feasibility. I'm not talking about can we, and I think you've got to think about alternative ways of financing. And that then, we get to this question of impact. How do we measure impact? And what is, and can we think about impact versus profit? Yeah.
And I was literally going to just open up on that contrast with what Robin was talking about in terms of, again, feasibility. How many times do you have to prove that something is possible on a site before it gets done. And I'm looking at your work again in 10 years in Johannesburg, and the work that you've done throughout that period, and meeting, like you're saying, meeting this affordable housing bubble where a lot of things were possible, social impact projects were able to get done. And I want to ask you that, do you then agree in the sense that, is it a war of attrition? You just have to keep at it until something happens and the moment arises, or is it meeting a moment or an opportunity in time and trying to read what is happening in that particular space?
I mean, I think in Cape Town, what blows my mind, I've only been here for 3 years, is how little those in power and those with capital value social impact. You know, it's just remarkable, and I think it's a big difference in you know, again, it was I like, you know, if we can historicize it, 2010 was a big moment of optimism where people thought differently, and that's when we invested in a lot of public spaces here too. So it was this moment in the culture where somehow social impact, you know, measurable social impact was something that was valued equally like profit. And you get here, and I think it's just palpable how those in power, both those with capital, but also the local government, they share the same kind of, it's like this cold, and it's pure financial feasibilities, you know. And so I think, and you compare that to, and I think we as if we can call ourselves activists, I don't know if I'd love to join your, get that title. I think we need to work harder at quantifying impact and making, you know, and how do you do that? So with something like housing, but you have to combine it, as Jens said earlier, with social infrastructure. You have to be able to prove to the money men how investing is going to give them something they can measure. It might not be profit, but it's something they can measure. And I think that's one way of getting to it. You know, and in my experience, you know, with if you try and, like I say, deconstruct, post-rationalize how this bubble happened. It was around that, you know, creating this vibe, you know. Without a World Cup, I don't know how to do it. You know, it's like yeah.
Can I respond to that? It's interesting you speak about impact and measuring impact, because ultimately, in Cape Town, unfortunately, the conversation is only about like the specific hard numbers and feasibility on the site, and a lot of the work that NU has been doing and other organizations has been highlighting that actually it's not only about social impact, because if people are traveling every day for 3 hours and are spending all their money and all their time, they are struggling, and even if you're a cold hard capitalist that only cares about your bottom line, if your employees and your workers are coming to work completely exhausted, if all of your public servants, if everyone is kind of living a struggling life in a city, how is that good for you and the economy if people are living in well-located housing, apart from all of the social benefits and integration, and it's improving people's economic well-being, it's allowing them to build intergenerational wealth, it's increasing their disposable income. So even if you're only looking at the economic bottom line, or you only care about meeting your climate change commitments, it's kind of it ticks all of these boxes. And I think kind of our obstacle here is if people who have the power haven't got the heart, at least we have to convince them and force them to kind of understand that there are a lot of ways that well-located affordable housing is an extremely important thing. And I think also it's a lack of empathy. I'm from Joburg originally, and I think in Cape Town, as you said, there is this lack of empathy or understanding, and a lot of, I think, willful living in a bubble or ignoring like social and economic realities. And I think in some way the political will hasn't been there because the people who are voting for the party that is in power here are protecting their own interests, and ultimately there is no political pressure on the party in power to do and be more progressive. And I think we have to we have to push and build and change the public will and the public imagination, because ultimately, unless there's that pressure, they can carry on just at their own slow pace and nothing happens.
Great. Great. So, and I really just want to also just invite the audience in at this point as well, just to think about that, because again, are we missing a metric of measuring some of these things, right? If we're unable to measure and make these things possible to be able to be quantified, and I say quantified loosely, right? Because how do you measure some of the stuff that we're talking about here and quantify it? But again, if we're unable to find a way to let these metrics, or find a metric to be able to start letting these be visible, how do we then start speaking the same language, right? So I want to understand, open it up to the public as well, to say in this competition format, are we able to as well, using something as the Now competition, where we're able to put proposals forward, are we able to start leveraging and opening up new metrics that we could then start being able to incorporate in some of the decision making in the right rooms where they need to be? Because until we're able to, what I'm getting from what Thomas and Boris Jens is saying, that if we're unable to actually make these visible to the right people, then it becomes a difficult and almost unachievable moving target that we keep trying to chase. So if any of you would have a question that wants to just contribute, that'd be great.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are enjoying your public holiday today. So I think on the question of empathy and then metrics also, I think it's then a conversation about what does the city value, because I think about it as a case of they've been doing measuring, they've been kind of also capturing in very varied ways, not necessarily just about either people or land, all of these things. It's social impact, it's residual impact in terms of this one decision could lead to so many other things. And I think the case may be that the city just values the international or the corporate or the company rand rather than the local rand. Because I think about, again, if a person's not spending 70% of their income on transport, they're spending it in the city. And what does that mean for that generating all the time consistently, not just in summer? So again, I think it's a conversation of where does their value or their kind of sense of value lie, and how can we then, and also I have a weird thing with trying to kind of appease, again, it's like, we've been doing it for so long. So it's a conversation of, again, I think the political will, and then also understanding where their value lies so that we can start to kind of shift the conversation from that. I don't know if there's anyone wanting to add on to that.
Nothing about us without us. My name is Zolan Gosingit. I'm not educated. I don't hear what you say. I'm saying I'm like a blind. It's very important when you have a meeting, everybody must be understand. Don't come here to sit to observe. We're here to participate and to get the information. I'm a speaker, I'm speaking behalf of disability, because most of disabilities are afraid to communicate with their community, because when you raise something, no one can understand. As today, do not thinking about when you organize the meeting, we have a community have a different disability blind. I'm not afraid for that, I'm proud of disability. Another thing is very important. When do something, you must focus about disability. When talk about housing, when you see the government and the management, you're not thinking about the disability. In the rural areas, in the location, we have not access to work with the wheelchair. When you draft the building in town, you can think about, okay, these statistics of housing must arrange for disability. If you're in the area, you must make sure when you make RDP houses, thinking about the disability. And we are not educated. What can we do for us as a government, as a community? And second, we are spending a lot of time in hospital. If I'm injured in 5 years, we'll spend 15 years in hospital. When you go to school, you go which age? In 15 years, we start grade R or something. Is the thing they block us to be educated. According to me, as activities and the speaker of disability, other one, when we think about disability, they think I'm using the disability. I'm dying for disability because I know other one, they're afraid to talk about disability. We are not a use of a grant. Other one, they think we are focusing to the grant. No, we want to do anything they do with another people. When this comes, disability is painful. I want to repeat again here. Most of other people are raising the same thing of disability. What about when you go to the hospital? The nurse in the hospital, they give the medicine to the deaf person because they don't understand the sign language. And the sign language must start in grade R to communicate. Those things is dangerous because we are not free as a disability. We are still in the slave. It's all when you're drafting anything, you must speak about the disability. Because one day you are abnormal and another day we have a disability. After that, we have a stress because you are not speaking about that before. When it comes to employment sector, that's why we are not applying. Because other one, they undermine us. No matter you have a qualification or not have a qualification, they say they spend a lot of money to be assist that things. Starting with transport, starting with housing, starting to the access to the buildings. When you talk about lead and when you talk about housing, it's deep. It's not summarized like that politics summarize because of pushing that agenda. We are begging you every corner. We're talking as activities. We are few. I want to repeat again. We are few as a disability. We are not as statistics. We see, we can talk if you are statistics. No. We are put the pressure on the corners. This information is very important to everyone. And to us, it's very important. We have a different disabilities. One day we meet other one, we will not speak like me. Because they have the disability. You must understand they have a disability. Thanks so much.
Thank you. My name is Michelle. I'm an urban designer, sometimes developer, and I thought it was also interesting because I've actually worked and lived in the council houses in London, and also my dad was disabled. So yeah, so I've lived part of my life helping out with that, and he also was an advocate for the space. So I've kind of got like a whole list of things, but maybe we'll just stick to one or two. For the disability, I just wanted to challenge, I think, mostly on two things. People's idea of inclusion and vulnerability. And so one of them is the universal access, and the other one is just in terms of like the whole province and where the budget is going at the moment, and what social housing means in terms of itself, and then in terms of infrastructure, say in the townships, where we're looking at this massive increase in the Western Cape, and people needing services just like rubbish removal, drains at the moment in winter, and where the actual reality is on the Western Cape. So I think I'm a strong advocate for like something like council housing in Sea Point and for the middle ground. I think if people are going for the middle ground in terms of that, would be much more successful, and I think you get a lot more buy-in in terms of developers and the council. I think in terms of that also, if we look at stats, I think from my knowledge, I know that the Western Cape is putting like 77% of their budget into infrastructure and into the very low economic spaces. They've also done a new street housing of 7.7 million, which is a huge part of their budget. And I think if there was more pressure on national, which is where they actually get the funding, it would be more successful and also challenge the people in the last 30 years what they haven't been doing. And I think also, so that's the one. And then the other one is the inclusion. And in terms of rather social, but rather vulnerable, I'd say, council housing. People like single moms that have been like dumped through divorce, or people that need universal access, who need that transport, or people that are, like you said, in Sea Point working there, where things become more specific and they focus on a vulnerable need. And I think if it was to be pitched to the municipality in that way, it would be a lot more successful. And then just a last one, because I know we will get there, in terms of places like parking, instead of public space. I think once people have had social housing, and I'd actually also like to argue as number one need, I think number two need is a sense of belonging and a sense of being accepted in community and mixed use, like a mixed, very diversification. And I think these parking lots are critical in a city to become urban spaces. And I think, for instance, in Harrington Street, there's a whole strip next to it, much larger than the square, with about at least 10 theses on that site. So I think putting a space in Harrington Square is extremely provocative. I think it reduces your argument and your credibility. I think that it also reduces the opportunity for belonging and for the sense of community of a whole. And I think that's binary, and I think it removes inclusion, but it also removes the spaces where people can integrate into that space and are actually absorbed into the community. And it removes that opportunity. And it also, after that, green spaces are critical in this world. And it removes that opportunity where these people have social housing, but they can just be nurtured on another level that typically gets removed from social housing. So I think there are a couple of things. And then one last criticism for Dufani and Kwazi. I know there's a huge amount of, I think, Tafelberg, which is also a middle ground, is excellent, and I really want to commend you on your huge efforts there. But I think also when people are lobbying for people that are squatters on Prasa, where they're actually preventing train lines, and we've had a huge rise in crime in Salt River, and likewise in Hope Street, where it's become, these buildings are starting to serve the 28s, and they're starting to serve massive webs of organized crime. And again, I think your voice is diluted, but rather becomes an issue of power and an issue of your voice versus actually inclusion, and but also to the municipality. So I think if you want to be efficient, go for the middle ground, go for something where it makes sense for everybody, and where not just criminals, but also vulnerable people in the community that are affected by this crime, and that everyone can work together. And I think that starts to value the Constitution, everyone's right to dignity, but everybody's right to the city as a whole. And people like Lefebvre who've discussed about having diversity, because I think key for humanity is diversity.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kesia. I just have a question about the Now Now competition, and I don't know the answer. These designs here are great, and they're really interesting, and it's nice to see the diversity and all of that. have they been costed? And if not, would that make a good phase 2? Because how you pay for it can only be answered if you know what you're paying for, how much it is. And from a feasibility perspective, Robin, I think that that's the issue, right? So you can then start to argue which pieces of that cost can be paid for with which interventions. And then I think an amazing thing that NU could do would even be to like build a calculator that shows the trade-offs. Because I mean, parking versus property, that's a trade-off, right? And what does that actually mean for the city? And what does that mean for the other stakeholders as well? Because in all of these trade-offs, there's going to be people who win a bit and who lose a bit. And to find the compromise between all of it is I think what we're trying to get to, because you need the players to work with you. So to create it, and a calculator would be cool, because then you could do it on all the properties. I'd love to see that.
Great. And I think I just want to jump on that specifically into my next question for the panel, is because it's that idea again of when design meets and then like question mark, right? Because I think that's the metric that we're talking about. Is it a fee calculator? And I want to talk about your work specifically when design has met a certain aspect in the work that you were doing that led to a certain breakthrough. And maybe that can start leading us to start thinking about what those things look like, right? Because the hurdle that we're all very familiar with is that costing. Right? Does it make sense? Can we make it work? And that's one way. But I would like to know from the panel that in your work, and what are some of the breakthroughs that you've seen where design meets a certain aspect and then somehow that project unlocked itself or was able to happen? Because I think then it starts giving us some ideas as to how then we start using and leveraging platforms like the Now competition to say, what do we do from here? Phase 2, what does that look like? Because then we can start take some learnings from those aspects. So again, when design meets or when design met in your work previously, what was that combination that led to a certain success or breakthrough in some of the work that you've done?
Okay. So to respond to that and to Kesia's question, so actually internally at NU, we have developed a feasibility calculator, and we have an ally of our organization who's a QS who has a lot of experience in social housing and affordable housing, and he's kind of crafted an extremely detailed calculator for us. I mean, it's going down to even like the individual rental amounts of subcategories of 2 and 1 bedroom houses, and how to cross subsidize social housing through market housing and transitional housing, and how to cross subsidize that, because obviously there is a social housing program and subsidy funding attached to that, and obviously at the moment it's a huge issue because there's hardly any social housing funding available over the next few years, and we can talk about how an enabling factor is also, it's not only policy, it's kind of it's governance, and it's how that policy is implemented. And in social housing, like a huge impact at the moment is that the social housing regulatory authority, who is the body who channels funding to social housing, is in a complete mess, and that's actually stopping any social housing on state land that's being released in Cape Town at the moment. So in 3 Anchor Bay, if you've heard about that piece of land there, it's being released, and ultimately on the city side, the argument is they aren't even considering social housing there, even though it's an extremely large and strategic site, because there's no social housing available. And I think it's a conversation as sector and as activists, I think we have to have a lot more, because if we are calling for a lot more land release of affordable housing, it has to be about all the levers. And we were talking about land release at zero rand R1, increasing available bulk and using deferred development charges and kind of expedited approval processes, that all the levers that are in place. But ultimately, if there's no funding that's coming in, there's an issue. And the other conversation I think we have to have around feasibility is also at a national level and at a local government level, actually incentivizing affordable housing, either through tax incentives. I mean, we can scrap all the VAT on affordable housing construction. That automatically drops the development of affordable housing by 15%. The government could introduce specific tax incentives, as they have done in other ways. For example, there's the urban development zone tax incentive. It was actually planned to be at an affordable housing incentive. It hasn't been used that way at all, and it's basically just a gift to property owners, and I can pass that on, or developers, and I can pass that on and reap huge benefits. It's a 30% tax incentives. And there's also the section 13(6) of the Tax Act, and that incentivizes investors to buy up to or a minimum of 5 units in one go, and then they qualify for a huge tax incentive. And why aren't we using those kind of tax incentives to actually incentivize the private sector and the financial sector and investors to actually put money into affordable housing? Because it can't only be about the social argument and impacts. It has to be, unfortunately, also about if you can make money, and if it's viable, and we have to talk about all of that, and the pressure points in all of those things are at all three levels of government. In terms of this competition, all of the entrants were actually given a high level feasibility calculator to kind of understand if their proposal was broadly economically viable. Just to answer your question specifically there, and I'll pass it on to you.
I was also just thinking about how to keep affordable housing affordable in perpetuity. So when these houses are built, are they going to be affordable forever? And how do we make sure that these things actually stay affordable to the average person? I think there's also a conversation that needs to be had about ring fencing funds from particular developments in order to fund affordable housing projects, and how we start looking at that as a means as well, because there's a lot of housing being built, but will it be affordable and forever? I don't know. And I think that's something we need to start thinking about more deeply as well.
And just a limited add to Jens's outline of all these mechanisms that exist to actually finance affordable housing. I just wanted to speak a little bit about the original proposal that Chate and I had worked on. So on these themes of making something possible, proving that it's possible, but the relationship also between design and feasibility was really where we hit up against this question of trade-off. So Chate and I had this one room where we would do the design, and it was just covered in 15 million iterations of unit schedules and Chate's urban design sketches. Chate also loves to skateboard, so she was very focused on the public space to make sure that there's good space for skateboarding. But there was, we were so deep, and we were very lucky to work with the same ally of Ndufuna Kwazi, who's really a national expert in financing affordable housing, and he was really keeping us in line about what is financially possible. So anyone who sees the publication, you can see section 9, where we have all of the financing of the original proposal, and we included, I guess as Ndufuna Kwazi, our principle is always the most affordable housing as affordable as possible. And what we came up against in doing the proposal was this trade-off of the ratios of how much market-related housing you need to cross-subsidize and actually pay for the affordable housing. So we ended up, we worked on a number of scenarios with 70% affordable housing that included social housing and transitional housing, or 50-50 split between the market-related housing and the affordable housing, or 30% affordable housing. And it was a really interesting process to go through with this person who really believes in affordable housing but understands the actual numbers. And I felt, as someone who's trained as a planner, for the built environment professionals in the room, I don't know if you can agree, but I felt very undertrained and underskilled in financial literacy. So this is also a barrier in our system. As architects, planners, designers, we kind of have to train ourselves into the numbers. So yeah, that financial literacy really feels like an issue in the space. But basically what we came up with is this financially feasible model that draws on national subsidies for social housing, cross-subsidizes market-related costs into the affordable housing, and a few other mechanisms that are often used in our environment. And I actually just wanted to invite Tjate to reflect on what the process was like of the trade-offs in designing the spaces, because something I really learned from Tjate working with the designer is, you know, I came in like the most affordable housing, as dense as possible, as affordable as possible, and Tjate really taught me to think from the perspective of people's experience of living there, even down to the detail of like where the sunlight would fall in a room. Whether it's an affordable unit or a market-related unit, it's like, what is the quality of this person's life going to be like in their home, in their space? And that included, just to touch on the gentleman's comment about disability access, you know, that included these trade-offs of, on a specific floor, could we have bathrooms that are wheelchair accessible, and does that mean that we have to give up on a specific unit on that floor because there's only a certain amount of space? So I don't know if you have any reflections on the trade-offs between public space and units, or disability access, or number of units, anything that you want to share.
Great question. I felt during the project, a lot of the times so I'm trained as an architect, and my undergrad was in architecture, and I felt like very much ill-prepared to actually design something that actually meant something to people. A lot of the time you do like these modernist designs or these like museums and everything, but then you don't really think of like the average person. So I found this project really interesting to get into, and also the gravity of the project as well. I think I realized, because it was during my gap year, I realized like halfway through that like this actually means something like to a lot of people. Like I'm not just doing this as like a side little thing during my gap year. I'm actually trying to mean something and make this possible, and you know, really get into the crux of everything. Trying to figure out like how much public space we needed, as opposed to like housing and everything, was really critical, because you also need place for children to play. You also need space for people to chill in the afternoon, to have space in the sun. And I found that really interesting and really difficult, especially because when we were working with Malcolm, the feasibility guy, we had all these like really lofty ideas of 70% affordable housing, 30% market related, and then Malcolm would just come in and like slash our idea like, that's just not possible, 50-50, and we're like, okay, maybe let's like compromise on this. And there was a lot of compromise in this design. We went through many iterations before we got into something that made decent sense to everyone. And even Adi was the former director of Difono Kwazi. He's trained as an architect, and he also had like really good inspirations and thought processes into what needs to happen in order to make this a little bit more livable and everything. So the entire process was really challenging, really overwhelming, but really gratifying at the same time.
About what design unlocks, eh?
Yeah,
The question.
and Emma's made a really great argument here in terms of, again, like the viability, the economic viability part. But I really would just like, if you could just in just two sentences for me, just one of those aspects where you were able to get like leverage design outside of the viability aspect, because I think that's really where we try to broaden this this conversation, start inviting those type of metrics into the conversation. So if you could just touch on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it helps to also look, even in Cape Town, you compared to somewhere like France or Paris, where we've had the opportunity to study affordable housing there, it's like construction costs here are still relatively low, actually very low. So the problem, the crazy thing is that it's so within reach that you can make an affordable development that's feasible, but it's just not quite. So then there's always has to be capital from somewhere that's not demanding a massive return, and that's where Schwa comes in, or whoever. But I mean, things we can do and we do is you can maybe split it in two ways. One is around technology. So are we thinking about new systems of technology? In Joburg, for instance, when it was a lot of adaptive reuse, it was about new kinds of lightweight walling and things like that, which is kind of for some people can be very boring. I find it quite interesting. All different ways of creating partitions in ways that are acoustically sealed, and thermally sealed. So, and there's lots of research and interesting stuff that can still happen there. I don't think it's going to get you over the hurdle of making really affordable housing still feasible without grant, let's say. The other ways is inventing new ways of sharing space, and that I guess because kitchens and bathrooms are by far the most expensive aspect of an apartment to build. And so, yeah, we'd experimented with co-housing models, for instance, where, 2 or 3 apartments share a single a kitchen or bathroom. And that was actually, it's changing the way people live, but it can work. I wanted to mention 2 things, though. The one is around the cities. I don't know who's had the pleasure or not of applying for a parklet in the city of Cape Town. So you know what that is, where you lease a parking space from the city for a single parking space, or 2 for and it's generally restaurants, where restaurants are, and you can think of these exclusive restaurants in the same way we think of all the fancy housing. But as a model of doing business with the city, I think it's very interesting, and it maybe relates to what we're talking about here, where it's this way, and because if you look at the metrics, the numbers of leasing a parking bay are actually quite low for these restaurants. So last one we were involved in was about 1,500 rand a month to get this whole lot of new restaurant space that you're now turning a profit on. So I think there's, that's just to say, I think we're at a very early stage of how to do business with the city, especially if the city's the landowner. And I think there can be a lot of innovation in striking these deals. And that's, I guess, what I was trying to talk about with the impact measurement, is that there's the city, I do think, is open, as much as we rain on them now, to finding new ways to do business in that way. Yeah, thanks.
Could I add? Kesa, just to add, or answer your question also, as part of our work now with that feasibility calculator, is we are actually actively identifying sites and new sites that are publicly owned land, and doing our own internal feasibility studies and renderings to kind of come up with an option, a viable option to kind of sort of advocate around, and in that way having a lot more of kind of an even conversation with the state at all levels, because we're looking at national land and provincial land and city land. And I think that's an exciting conversation, because, as Robin said, like having that literacy to be able to talk about hurdle rates and internal rates of return and blended finance and all of that is something that historically I don't think as activists we've been able to do. Then I think it's strengthening our work now and into the future. So yeah.
Great. All right, I'm gonna close up with like one more question, and then literally have like a little 2-minute Q&A. Please, 2 minutes as soon as I'm done with this question, just to make sure that we wrap up and then we close it off. So basically, just again for the panel, I think, and I'm going to open it up for everyone. Really, I think this is one of those where we can all really jump in, particularly with the format of this discussion and the format of the Now competition and the proposal and everything we discussed here today. So I'd really just want to ask everyone again, as you participate, is that now that we've seen that design can be used as a lever, right, for change in specific aspects, again, to variable degrees. Right, we've spoken to the panelists and we've seen where design has been able to meet certain challenges and where those limitations have been, right? So what I'd like to know from everyone is that where would we like to see these proposals land? For example, already we spoke about a phase 2, right? And it's taking something and building on something that we've already established. Because I think so many times as well, we not build on the work of of the others that have come before us. We keep expanding the conversation, expanding the toolbox, but we don't actually start investing in building in what's working, right? As we've sort of picked up as well, it's a war of attrition a little bit, right? We keep pushing visibility until that moment and that opportunity arises and things sort of make sense, right? So again, where would you like to see this land as a community here? Because again, I see familiar faces. We come around here and we have these conversations, but in the platform and a format such as this, with the Nano competition, looking at these proposals, looking at design as a lever, speaking about these limitations and possibilities of what it can and has done for us, where would you like to see this land? Where would you like to see this conversation go? And I say conversation with inverted commas because, again, right, we're building on what others have done. All of the entries I've built have set a platform for us with the proposals that we've seen here. And how do we then start taking that forward? How do we interrogate these and then create a platform for others to start building on those? So that's what I'd like to open it up for everyone. Any takers?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, just a small departure from the program, if you'll indulge me for just 5 seconds. So there was a comment earlier from the crowd that we feel has to be addressed. So there was a comment earlier about, Hope Street occupation, Prasa land, people occupying, and how those people are criminals. So the point is not to shut down discussion. We want people to share their views, freedom of speech. But we don't want misinformation to spread, So we just want to address this particular narrative. So Hope Street occupation, those are clients of Ndifunukwazi, right? Those are people occupying a building in Hope Street, right? Prasa land occupations, those are homeless people who've lived on that land for some of them 20 years, right? So it's important that we don't conflate homelessness with criminality. That's a very dangerous narrative. It's very much giving Swat Khafar. Let's not do that, okay? So, for example, I'm from Nyanga, right? Crossroads. Very dangerous area. Top 5 in Cape Town. Now, am I a criminal because I grew up in an area around criminals? Right? We see this logical fallacy, right? So we cannot, just because some people might be criminals in an area, now put a blanket statement that everyone, these people are criminals, why should they have any rights? Let's not do that. Let's not do that, okay? So this is just, we need to intervene when these sort of narratives start to take hold. And so mine is to just let you know that we are representing the people, the homeless people living on Transnet land. Those are our clients. And to call them criminals when, we're not SAPS here, none of us are SAPS here, so no one knows anyone's criminal record, you understand? So let's not do that. And some of the Hope Street occupiers are here today. And these people are not criminals, they are our guests, they are our clients. So just to intercede on that point. Okay, let's continue.
Thank you very much. My name is Bulela Guija. I'm a final year law student at UWC. I just wanted to not to shift this, but there's something I want to say. I want to make an observation or just put this out there. This is what has been happening in Cape Town. The city is not for people to enjoy. The city is where people come and work. So labor is extracted from people here in Cape Town, and then they have to commute and go back to wherever they come from to live. Those are the spaces they enjoy. So now, if we're saying we want to reimagine the city and we have these beautiful designs, and some of them actually talk about sharing spaces and all of that, I feel like we can't really, I don't want to say we're not there yet if we haven't started right here at the bottom to say, can we in fact share these spaces? How would we come into these spaces and feel welcome and be able to integrate within these spaces if we feel like we're going to be invading Cape Town if we are allowed to live in Cape Town? It's like a norm now. do not belong here. We just come here to study and to work, and that is it. So that's just what I wanted to add, so that maybe in our conversation we can also touch on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone who's here this morning. I'm speaking on behalf of the Now Now. The Now Now competition are not experts in affordable housing at all. And I just want to say it's been an absolute pleasure to learn from Indafuna Ukwazi. And in being in this event and seeing the different perspectives that we share here peacefully and diplomatically, thank you very much. It's very obvious how heavy this work is. And I just want to say that design does play a role, but it's your guys' chance now to take it forward. And where do we want to see this go? We're not sure, but all I can tell you is that through hosting of this competition, we have seen progress in the narrative. We've seen the story changing. We've read articles. We've been approached by people. And I do believe that the work is moving forward. And just before we decide where it goes, I would just like to say well done on how far you've taken it thus far. Cool.
Hi, I'm Ruben from UCT. I'm an honors student in architecture. I think what was really interesting about the document, I've just been sort of, paging through, was this idea that you frame the problem as Cape Town is still functioning as an apartheid city. But what I was finding, what I was finding like a little bit, I don't know, inconclusive, was that one of the solutions is that there needs to be inclusionary housing in the city, which obviously that's one of the solutions. However, there isn't sort of a continuation of this narrative of what happens with the rest of Cape Town. So I think what I would love to see was what does sort of the decentralization of Cape Town look like as a way of sort of shifting this idea of opportunity is centered in the city bowl. So instead of saying all of the people need to come to where opportunities are, how do we bring opportunities where people are already? And I feel like that is something that needs to be explored a little bit more, because it's something that we're also starting to think about in our projects at UCT. But yeah, anyway, it's really cool to be here.
Okay, thank you. My name is Faisal. I've been involved with the anti-eviction campaign for many years, dealing with the evictions of people from city housing. The issue for me that is missing from this whole discussion is the issue about apartheid spatial planning, that we are still having that in existence. And I think it's important that we must redesign the open spaces, the public spaces. But we're still sitting with the apartheid spatial planning that also needs to be redesigned. Because in our communities, whether it is Langa, whether it's Menenberg, whether it's Hanover Park, what is happening to those communities? So there's a need for redesigning those communities so that that becomes livable spaces. Because the whole of the Cape Flats has become like a death trap to many people. And we need to look at how do we change the way people move and people locate themselves within the city. As one of the questions that was raised on one of the pamphlets was, who's the city being built for or developed for? I think that's the question. And I think that is something that we need to start thinking about. Who are the city? Is the city the civic center or is it the people? So we need to get some clarity in terms of when we talk about the city, is it the people or is it the buildings or is it business? So I just want us to start thinking along those lines. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Jocelyn Bucas. I am a great-grandchild of somebody that was removed from District 6, and I'm going to repeatedly speak about it because our people have not returned. Less than 400 people have returned to District 6, but we're prioritizing urban spaces. We don't have urban spaces in Menenberg, Khayelitsha. We're not prioritizing those urban spaces, but we're prioritizing urban spaces for foreigners. Let's be honest. We're prioritizing businesses for foreigners. We are not prioritizing people that's livelihoods were stolen. The opportunities for generational wealth was stolen from us. We had grandparents that had businesses here, even though it was small businesses, by today it would have been big corporates today, if we were given that opportunity. So I would love for Ntukwazi to challenge that, challenge the fact that people have not returned, challenge the fact that there's no real equity over here. I'm going to speak about my occupation that I live in. I'm being marginalized, discriminated because I'm brown. There's no real integration in even occupations. I'm being seen as privileged because my parents live in Kuils River, because I look privileged apparently. I'm light-skinned, so I am being marginalized even in an occupation where I thought it was about integration. We want to bring everybody back. So I would love for organizations also to help us, not only with the buildings that we get, but even how we coexist with each other, to respect the fact that I'm a single mother, that I had to give my child to his father because I don't have my own house, because I'm being judged according to my parents. I'm being ostracized by my own family because I don't have my own house. So, yes, as an organization, I would also like to partner with other organizations because I know you have a lot to deal with. So partner with organizations that also have a passion for human beings to start coexisting and to respect the fact that we all are struggling together. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. I want to respond to the point about where from here. Where do we go from here? I think what's really nice about this morning and from the exhibition is the constructive proposals that are emerging. Right, NU is playing an active part, it seems, in developing positive ideas for the future. And for me, this is critically important to get this beyond this room. We need to get out into the wider public. We need to engage with the media. We need our campaigns to be not just critical, but also constructive. We've got positive ideas for transforming the city. We have an election coming up later this year. We fortunately live in a democracy, so we must use those democratic platforms to hold politicians to account. We need to win public allies for the case of the parking, the craziness of our city, using parking lots instead of housing. Some of these ideas are so compelling that we need to, really get them out there to win the hearts and minds of the wider public, so that it's not just a small elite here that are believers, but we can persuade other people, because the case is insurmountable, right? The case is so compelling. But we need to spread the message much more widely and think about all sorts of opportunities to get the message out there, to change public opinion. And then the politicians will follow. Right, the politicians follow public opinion. That's the way to change political opinion, to get the public behind these great ideas.
I'm speaking on Utatu Ndiki on behalf of him, and he says that I think following or building on top of his point about government officials and all of these things, that a lot of the processes that we're talking about, that we're imagining, will also just not be followed, and that there has to be public pressure in terms of actually keeping people accountable. And what are those systems that we can start building where we actually are able to keep people accountable, where mass congregants of people are able to be aware of something not being done and be able to challenge them. I mean, I think a friend of mine actually had a poll out about who has struggled with property owners or landlords in Cape Town. Things like those where people are able to voice out that I've been unfairly kicked out of this situation, and then they can be directed towards a housing tribunal. Or be able to be directed towards small court and things like that, where I think, again, on the vulnerability conversation, where people are able to actually voice out on a public scale, not necessarily on an interpersonal, whether it's yourself and the organization, but you can see the live count of people, live count of engagement towards that certain conversation, because I think it's when it starts siloing out onto one particular conversation, that they can actually not act on whatever they're trying to do So I think it's, again, building apparatus to actually function as a public, to have a voice as a public. Yeah.
Great, and I just want to close it off with just one thing that I've picked up, right? And it's that we've all got, again, vested interests and opinions of why we're here, why things need to move forward, right? And we've all been brought together under this specific platform and format. And again, I urge us, all of us, because we need to start rallying behind some of these things. Let's find the commonalities in the proposals that are here as well, and start mobilizing and finding those interests within this diversity that we have here, because it's when we're able to do that, that we're able to then start pushing some of these things forward. So as much as we have these diverse interests, let's start finding those commonalities and starting to find some of these, look at these proposals, find something that speaks to you, that speaks to your arguments, that speaks to your cause within these proposals. Because if we're able to do that and then find those commonalities between all of us and be able to rally behind one of these, then we start opening up the opportunity to push these ideas into channels that they need to be, knowing that our voice is embedded within that proposal in one way or another. So I'd urge us all, as we've done and as we've been able to come here today, to just walk through one more time through the whole on the way out, look at the proposals, study them, look at them, ask for the file, ask for the brief, whatever you need to do. Find if there's a commonality in there for you, something that you can latch onto where your cause can build on it. And if we're able to do that, then we start again like being able to unite our voices around a certain aspect of this problem. I hope everyone can take a little bit of inspiration from that, and I hope we can all again, like through this format, one more time, please, as we move by, just take a look at that and see if there is a bit of your work, your cause, what you're passionate about in that proposal, so we can start pushing that forward again and starting to have that public opinion, being able to drive and mobilize voices behind it, because I do think we all care about the same things in different facets and formats. So let's try to do that so that we can make the most of our voices and our passions. The last thing I want is for us to leave here, all right, and then go back to business as usual. Great. Fantastic. Anything from my panels before we close off? Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, cool. We're going to do something we said we wouldn't do, but we're going to do it now anyway. Prof, we've decided that after this event, if you register with your email, we'll be sharing all the proposals with everyone, and we want you to do with them whatever you think is positive. But now we'll be announcing the winners of the competition, starting with third place. I don't know if he's present or not, but from Musivingo in Zimbabwe, Alfred T. Matsipa. Well done. He's in Zimbabwe. Okay, very, very chuffed. Both second place and first place are local teams. So in second place, we have, with the competition proposal called Incremental Commons, Aiden Schippers, Imad Kamaluddin, and Tyler Barnes. Well done. Last but not least, first place. I believe they also work in the practice of Malcolm Campbell, so obviously some insider knowledge over here. But we have Leona Veyer, Tutuka Zondi, who I see over here, and Nazneen Delvi. Well done, you guys are the first place winners for the Now. And on behalf of the first place, I'll come give you. We have both of you. Oh, no, Tutuka, you in the first place team. He's hiding. Cool. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to hand over now to Butle. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining us on public holiday. And then we have one or two more small items, and then we'll be closing up for the day. Enjoy the rest of the time off.
No, we can't let... Please, a huge round of applause for Sebastian. We want to see the winners. Comrades, please come. Don't run away. Come, comrades, come. Come. Come.
I was in the thing.
No, thank you very much. They're hiding. They don't want to be seen. They've done an amazing work of reimagining public spaces. And we really hope that your proposals can give life to those spaces, that those spaces can be built for people. And that's the significance of what you've done. I always say to people that your education is not for your own social mobility, but use your education to advance justice in society. If anything at all, that's what your education should be. Otherwise, it's useless if it's not used to advance and change people's lives. So thank you very much, and we hope that what you've put in your heart and soul into those proposals, we hope they'll come into life. We hope that the province and Parliament will see those designs, will see those proposals, and something would move in them to do something about the use of those public spaces. So thank you very much. We really are grateful for the wonderful work that you've done. A huge round of applause.